Hello seniors, this is Unit 3, Day 1. Our topic for today is Law of Demand, and we'll also talk about quantity demanded. Our essential question, how do demand and price interact? Basically, what's the relationship between demand and price? We're going to graph and analyze the law of demand with demand schedules, and we will graph and explain how changing prices creates changes in quantity demanded. We're also going to continue working with our key terms. This ties in with our two new standards. Top one is dealing with demand, and the bottom one is working with supply. We'll be working with the top one first, and we continue to work with our content key terms. Our first quiz is going to be on, quiz number 5 is going to be on Monday. These are the terms that you should know, along with all of your terms from Unit 1 and Unit 2. And we'll go over the do now and take some notes as we learn about demand, the law of demand, and quantity demanded. And you can refer to Chapter 5, Sections 1 and 2 in your textbook. So here we go. Based on your do now, you took a look at what you were willing and able to buy at various price points. So for me, for an example here, at $1.25, I would buy 10 bags of chips. At $2.75, maybe 7, $4.75, 4, maybe at $6.25, I'd only buy 2, and at $7.50, maybe I'd only buy 1. But that's just me. Everybody is going to be a little bit different, and what you put on your do now on that table 1 will reflect your own preferences. And we can come up with some definitions then as well. Demand is going to be the amount of good or service that consumers are willing and able to buy at all prices. So you must want it, be willing, and also be able to. You have to have the money. If either of those is missing, demand does not exist. And demand in this case is going to refer to the entire demand, so all 24 bags of chips that are desired. This is different from quantity demanded. The main difference is that quantity demanded focuses on a specific price. And so, for example, 10 bags at $1.25 is different from the total demand of 24 bags. So look carefully at what is being asked, and in your responses, look carefully whether you say demand or quantity demanded. Quantity demanded will only occur when there is a change in price, as we'll see at the end. We can do a similar thing with a market demand. If you put in the first column there what you would buy, but then if you obtain data from your classmates what they would buy, and we put all of that together, we're going to have a market demand schedule. And so we can add the columns across horizontally at $1.25. We're going to have 37, so on and so forth, all the way on down, and this is called a market demand schedule. And this will be Table 2 on the do now. And we can define these terms. So under Table 1, you've got letter A. There you can write individual demand schedule. And here's another example of that. And then under Table 2, there's letter B with a line, and you can write market demand schedule. So you have another example of demand schedules from your do now and then here. And basically a schedule is a table that lists the quantities that people are willing and able to buy, whether individually or collectively. And so if we analyze that data and we look at what happens to quantity as price goes up and what happens to quantity as price goes down, we find that if price goes up, quantity decreases, and if price goes down, quantity increases. So they're opposites. And so we take this analysis and we get the law of demand, which basically says that consumers will buy more of a good or service as the price decreases, or vice versa. And we can graph that law of demand, creating a simple XY axis. Quantity is always on the x-axis, price is always on the y-axis, and we always have this curve. It's always going to be a negative slope. It's an inverse relationship between price and quantity. And it makes sense based on what we saw in Table 1 in our market demand schedule, that at a very high price, you're going to have very low quantity demanded. But as your price decreases, people are going to want to buy more. And that makes sense, right? At low prices, we want to buy more. At high prices, we either don't want to or we can't afford it. We don't want to spend our money that way. And so we can graph the law of demand, or graph a demand curve, using our data in Table 1. And students were able to do that on the do now. I put some XY coordinates, and you can label them Q and P, and you can put in your quantities down here on the bottom. I'm just going to put a few for examples, and our price points would be here as well. We might say $2, $4, $6, and $8. And this might be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 bags of chips. And as we plot these points, we should see something that looks like this, and then we can label our curve D1 for demand 1. We're going to be working with more curves, and so it's important to label them so we know what we're working with. Okay, so you can do that on your do now, and then you can also do that for the market demand schedule, doing the same thing. This graphic organizer will help you understand the many ways that demand is affected. We're going to look at one way today. In your homework for next class, you're going to look at other ways. So for today, we'll look at price, and in the future, we're going to look at non-price factors. And so one thing I want you to put down here for price, that price can either go up or go down. And quantity demanded can either go up or go down. And so basically, if price changes, then quantity demand changes. And so I would put that in here. I would add that next to the price bubble there, so that you have that in your notes. If price changes, then quantity demanded changes. And notice in our learning objective down here, we're working with quantity demanded, not simply demand. And so change in quantity demand, a change in price that causes movement along the demand curve. We're not shifting the entire curve as we will be with other things. We're only moving on the curve, up or down on the curve. And here's what it looks like. If we start out with P1, which is going to be price 1, we're going to be at point A on the curve. And if we go down, we're going to be at Q1 or quantity 1. But if our price moves from P1 to P2, we would say that price decreases. And so price decreases, we hit point B on the curve. And that's at quantity 2. And so that what happened as price decreased, quantity demanded increased from Q1 to Q2. And we show that on the curve by drawing that arrow from A to B. So we went down the curve, which is a quantity demand increase. And so we do an example, and I did this one for the class to model how to do this. We always set it up the same. So we're going to start off with our price and quantity and label them, and then we can put in a demand curve and we label it D1. So that's what we'll start with all the time. And then we look at our question. It says gasoline prices rise from $2.50 to $3 per gallon. What kind of change will happen in the market for gasoline? Graph and explain your decision. And so the first 3 words are most important here. Gasoline prices rise. So I know that my starting point for price, to figure out what happens here, I'm going to start with P1, and I'm going to have Q1 right here. And if prices rise, that means my P2 is going to be higher than P1. And that means that my quantity 2 is going to be less than my quantity 1. And so what I'm showing here is that as prices rise, my quantity demanded is going to have movement up the curve, which is a decrease in quantity demanded. We must use the term quantity demanded because we're talking about a change in price. And so this is what I want you to be able to do when I say graph. Explain, I'll show you on my next slide here, but I want you to use the words quantity demanded. So as price increases, quantity demanded decreases would be a good explanation. And here's another way to say that. So students did another one on their own. I want you to take a look at this, pause the video, do this on your own. and then see if yours is similar to what I have for you right here. All right, so here we go. We always set it up the same. We put our quantity, and we put our price, and we put our demand curve, and we call it D1. And now I'm looking at the price for pizza decreases, and what's the change in the market for pizza. And so I'm going to start off with my P1. If price decreases, I want to start up high. I'll be P1 here, and that brings us right down here at Q1. And then price is going to decrease, so let's go down here, P2. We hit the demand curve right there, and Q2 is right here. And so now I see that we started here and we ended here. That means that as price decreased, quantity demanded increased, and we had movement down the curve, which is a quantity demand increase. And here's another way of explaining that. Notice the use of the term quantity demanded. Okay, we must use the language precisely. And that's where we ended. Your homework being chapter 5.3, which is about the non-price factors that affect demand. There's 6 of them, so note each one of them and see what happens on the graphs. Update your key terms list. We'll have a quiz on Monday, and then continue reflecting on what you are learning. I did check homework for today, so if you were absent today, be sure to show that to me when you can. And for your ticket out, it's another way to practice. We'll go over this one next class. Let me know if you have any questions.